that you find these webinars helpful and that it can help you navigate through this crisis, but also through the communications and the actions that you take, help you prevail the crisis. So obviously the goal is that we come out of this in as best condition as possible for all of us. So if you're all okay, we're gonna start with the webinar. So the way we are going to do this is I am going to talk a little bit. So I'll give you some sort of very high level best practices in terms of what I recommend organizations do to better communicate through this time. And then we're going to leave some time, obviously the majority of time, we will leave it open to questions, because I want to make sure that you have time to ask any specific questions that you may have. Everyone is in a different or a slightly different position. You have different audiences and facing likely different challenges. So if there's any specific questions that you may have, any challenges in particular that you're facing now, please feel free to ask those questions, and I'll try my best to help with that. So first, I want to talk to you a little bit about clarity, because in times of crisis, there's a lot of uncertainty, and obviously uncertainty breeds fear and anxiety. And when you are feeling like that, it's very difficult to think clearly, never mind communicating clearly. So and of course, clarity is what everybody wants. Everyone is really craving or really looking for clarity. Now, when I'm talking about clarity, I don't mean certainty. Clarity is not the same as certainty. So you may speak with clarity in terms of this is what we know now, but you may not know exactly what are the specifics of things. So it just means speaking in speaking in a very concise, logical way, as best as you can with the information you know, and just being very open and transparent about that. That's what we mean by communicating with clarity. And to achieve that, we really need to do these three things, which is first recognize, reassess, and respond. And I'll talk a little bit about each one of them. So when we talk about recognize is really, oops, sorry, my slides are a little wonky here, but we'll just move here. We'll talk about, is really acknowledging your reality, right? Is what is my current reality right now? And by the way, and we'll go back to this slide, this will likely change. So the phase of before the outbreak, which we have the first phase obviously on the left, and then phase 1 and phase 2, which is during the outbreak and the containment of it. So I think most of us obviously are in this phase 2, and then hopefully phase 4 will come and can't come soon enough, which is when we recover. So a lot of the things that I'll be mentioning today are mostly in this phase 2. But keep in mind that regardless of where you are in your organization, it's important to always go through this process. We may need to go through this process of recognizing, reassessing, and responding more than once, because as this outbreak prevails, and depending on how long it goes to, the reality that we face as an organization and as a community will be changing according to that. So we'll likely need to, our realities will change, and we need to recognize where we stand within that time and be able to reassess how to respond to it and what we can do. So that's what I mean by that. So it's not just something that we're going to do or we have done once and then we can keep going, right? So when we talk about recognizing it, is this, okay, what is our reality right now? And in this I mean, 2 weeks ago, it was probably very different than what it is today. And I'm not sure how fast this may change again, but maybe 2 weeks from now or 3 weeks from now, we'll be in a very different reality again. So we may need to be able to constantly be acknowledging where we are, where we stand, and how we're doing. And being aware of our response to, and when I say, avoid limiting beliefs and scarcity thinking, is just being aware of how we're responding to this, because we do need to find that balance between being very realistic, but not downplaying, certainly, but also not exaggerating the situation. And of course, taking note of our resources. And that is an area where I think most of us will need to be quite creative and probably do things that we normally don't do or haven't even thought about doing. So some of our resources in the past may still be available today, but maybe some of them are not. And then where else can we look? What else can be there that we haven't thought about or tapped into before? So this is where we may need likely to be very creative. The reassess phase is really, once we understand our reality now, then is being able to assess any vulnerabilities, right? So obviously, what are our risks? And some of the questions that you may want to ask during this time is, how is this impacting our clients, those who we serve? What is our current cash position, obviously, and can we continue to provide any services at all, or most of our services if all our staff is working from home, for instance, or where we are now. So those are sort of some of the questions that, again, depending on where we are, and we may need to, as we recognize our new reality, reassessing also our new vulnerabilities. And once we know that, then we can think about, is there any way we can mitigate our risks or make them not as impactful? And what I recommend is taking this in different levels. So thinking about this from an incremental level. So for instance, tier 1 is we can minimal changes that you need to do as much as possible, but that are helpful. So obviously things that I'm sure a lot of you or most of you have done already is pausing new hiring or pausing any new program that you may have. The second tier would be making conservative changes. So things like redirecting resources or decreasing program sizes, closing non-essential programs, things like that. And of course, tier 3, which I know some of you have already had to move already into this phase, which is radical moves, right? So laying off people and stoppage of services, or at least some of them. But regardless of what you had to do to mitigate your risks, also think about, is there any new opportunities for us as an organization? And obviously this will vary tremendously depending on what you do, who you serve, and what may be available to you, or resources you may have available to you at this point. But really do try to, again, this is an area where we have to be really creative and explore of opportunities. Because in some cases, and some of the questions that I think are important to ask here is, do the current conditions that we have now in our community, does that actually make us more relevant? And how can we continue to support those who we serve, but in different ways? And again, I know a lot of you have already done great work in these areas. And a really important one is, how can we provide value? So even if we're not doing anything close to what we used to, is there any way we can continue to provide value to those who we serve? And maybe even continue to build awareness of our organization. So when we are done with this crisis, when we pass through to the recovery phase, we are still top of mind. People are still aware of us or remember us and will re-engage or support us again. And sometimes, and I've seen some great examples, and I'll walk you through some of the examples that I've seen within our community and within some of your organizations of what you're doing in these areas. And one of the things that I think is really important here, particularly when you start exploring opportunities, is if you see an opportunity, don't wait until you get it perfect. So I think acting, being fast is really important here. So taking action. And then, of course, we move to the third phase, which is the respond. So once you have, recognized where you are and reassessed all your risks and potential opportunities, then create, and I really mean by a summarized plan, I really mean bullet points, very clear and very simple. This should not take you a lot of time at all. And especially because you may need to do this, the recognize, reassess, and respond often or every couple of weeks. So make sure that this is very clear and very simple to do. So what is our plan? And it should be things like, where do we find ourselves? What is our situation? What are our priorities and what needs to change? So those are the things that make sure you have on your plan. And look at your key messages. So define the key messages per audience. Everyone has different audiences. So define your key messages per audiences and per platform. So who are you communicating with and in what platform are you using? And make sure you communicate with your audience. And we're going to talk more about this, but frequency here is really important as well. And upping the frequency of how you communicate with your audience is important as well during this crisis. And one thing that I will also, before we continue, that I also want to say is make sure you have someone that is responsible to communicating with each of your audiences. So if it's the same person, that's fine. If it's different persons, if it needs to be a different person per audience or per couple of audiences, then make sure you have that so you can keep up with the frequency. So making sure that everyone is well informed, and you can make sure that you are consistent in your message. And obviously keep in mind that your first audience that you need to communicate to is your internal audience. You want to make sure that your staff obviously is aware of any changes that will happen before your external audiences, obviously. Now, I wanted to, this is something that just came out. So we did this webinar last week, but we didn't have some of these new released consumer behaviors research. So this was global studies that were done on consumer behaviors or media consumption. So a lot of the results here are not surprising, but they are worth noting, and they can be really important when we are formulating our communications. So a lot of people are asking me, should we pull back in our marketing or promotions, or should we just talk about the outbreak itself, or what we're doing because of the outbreak? So there's some organizations that are thinking, and some have already pulled back completely, so not marketing or promoting themselves at all. Some have modified the way they engage, so to fit the current realities. So they're still communicating, but in a different way. So they are adapting what they are communicating to talk about the outbreak, to talk about what they're doing through the outbreak, but also promoting themselves and any programs that they may have. Excuse me. And some of them have continued to promote or to market as usual. This is rare, I would say, but certainly some organizations have done that. And these consumer behaviors and media consumption research can be helpful in trying to gauge what is the right thing to do. So obviously, since the outbreak, and particularly in areas where we have social or, I want to reframe the social isolation or social distancing to physical distancing instead of social distancing, because we don't want, actually, I think it's very important to people to continue to connect, and continue to feel that we have communication and that we feel close to each other. So while staying physically apart. So I think for me, it's about physical distancing, not social distancing. So, but anyways, going back, for the communities that are doing this physical isolation, this becomes even more important. But not surprisingly, 95% of consumers are saying that they have increased media consumption. So these would be things from streaming services, obviously, but also use of the internet, TV, and it changes from ages. So Gen Zs are, of course, more likely to be using music streaming services, for instance, while baby boomers are watching more TV. So, and smartphone usage is a lot higher, and it depends also on the age group, but on average, it's about 70% higher. So this is really significant. And of course, people are a lot more in social media platforms because we are looking for information. We want to know what's happening. We want to feel connected, and so we are looking for more information. So all of this is to say the frequency, how often you are communicating, I think needs to increase significantly than what you may have done before the coronavirus crisis, because people are in their platforms, in social media platforms, and they really want to have more constant communication. A lot of consumers' views on advertising differ significantly. So everybody is all over the place. They either think that you should continue to market as normal, or not market at all, or do it in a different way, as I mentioned, sort of a modified way. But what consumers really want any brand to do, and this of course includes for-profits and not, is to first look after your staff. So make sure that when you communicate, you are letting people know that you are keeping staff safe if you are still providing services, and if you are not, really explaining. Again, you have to be very transparent and open, and really explaining what is happening. So even if you had to let go some staff, explain the reason why and be honest about it, but showing that empathy and care for your staff. And of course, helping consumers also want to know that you're trying to help with any efforts in the community efforts to fight the coronavirus. And of course, being a nonprofit, some of you are already or very directly involved with this, but some nonprofits may not be. So people still want to know, is there anything you are doing to help with this? The key thing here that both consumers want, and that I always think is important, is to be of service to your audience. So if anybody knows me, they have heard me say this a million times, even before the crisis, which is be of service, try to be helpful, think of your consumer, of your audience, of those who you serve first, and make sure that you're doing everything you can always to be of service to them. And of course, helping the community at large. So anything that you can do, and by being a nonprofit, I think you already do that, but just communicating that as well. What you really should avoid, of course, is, and consumers in the research make this very, very clear, is to not exploit the crisis at all. Now, this is a very tricky area, because obviously, as being a nonprofit, I don't think you are exploiting anything ever, but is the perception of taking advantage of this crisis to help raise awareness of your nonprofit, for instance. So, and it can be tricky, and therefore that's where some organizations have chosen not to talk about their programs, or to continue to raise awareness of the organizations because they may be afraid of being perceived insensitive or not being sensitive enough about what's going on through this crisis. So I think you know your organization best, obviously, and your audience, but I do think that there are risks as well if you don't communicate about your organization and the programs that you may still be able to offer, or that you are planning to offer, maybe things or programs for later in the year that you're planning to offer. I think there are risks with that. So it's trying to find that balance. I think as long as you are sensitive to what is happening and to empathetic to what people are going through and trying to help, and people can see that you are doing different things to trying to help, I think you're safe to continue to talk about and have a mix of communication that talk about the crisis and how you're helping, but also talk about programs and things in the future, and continue to offer your services. Because if you recall that that slide where it talked about the different phases of the virus or the crisis, we are moving, and some of us already are in the phase where, okay, we are at home, and maybe some of us are working, maybe some of us are not. Our kids are sort of, having classes online, but we are also now looking for ways of how can we keep our children entertained, how can we keep ourselves entertained and busy or healthy. So there's a lot of things that are not directly related to talking about the outbreak itself or the crisis, but that are helpful for your audience as they move through this crisis, that are things that they need, that people are looking for, because it's not healthy to be listening to the news every time or all day long about the crisis, and you can't. But people do want to also go through this crisis as best as they can. So obviously, being entertained and be able to access some services that can be helpful to them will be of value. So if you are an organization that can provide anything of the sort, then I say that go ahead and do it. And again, even if it's not perfect, you can correct it, but it will be helpful. The one thing that consumers in this research are saying is to avoid humor. And although I think humor can be helpful in this time of crisis, it can be difficult to strike the right balance and to find the right message to say in a way that will not offend anyone. So I do think that unless you know your audience really well and you already have your brand personality already is kind of humorous and it would be normal for you and your audience kind of expects that, then unless that's the case, then maybe try to avoid that. So not to be perceived in any negative way. So just a list of to summarize some of the how and what to communicate is, first of all, communicate really frequently with clarity and empathy. And transparency. So, trying to really achieve that balance of you don't want to exaggerate the situation, but you are being as transparent as you possibly can, letting people know about the reality that your organization is in, and just being very clear on that. When you are communicating that, and especially if you are communicating about having had to make difficult decisions of stopping programs or letting staff go, explain why and show empathy, of course, for your staff. I think we've seen a lot of people having to do that from all across from nonprofits to social enterprises and for-profits. So sadly, this is something that is happening often. But just explaining the reasons why, I think can be helpful. Explaining as clearly as you can what is going to change and what will not. And again, this goes back to that, recognize, reassess, and respond, and you may change again. So you may have done this already, but you may need to do it again, and you'll certainly, hopefully, will have to do it again once we are in the recovery phase and you start ramping up to, hopefully, what you were normally or before the crisis. Obviously, don't make any promises that you can't keep. So again, being very transparent, and you can say, we hope we can do this, or we hope we can reopen, or that we can have this event take place if it's something that you're planning for later in the year, but you're not sure. So, just being clear on that. Always using clear, concise, and consistent language. So during a time of crisis, it's difficult for people to understand language, or to be able to really digest a lot of content. So being as concise, clear as you possibly can is always helpful, but particularly now. Being of service, as I've mentioned before, even if it's not directly related to what you normally do. So again, trying to be very creative in this area, and I'll show you some examples later on. But there's some organizations, and the Glamble comes to mind, where they are closed, obviously, but they are providing some services in terms of talking about some of the pieces that they have there, or some virtual tours or anything like that. So if there's something you can do, even if you're not providing any programs or services as you normally do, then, but can still be of service and help people, then let's try and do that. And again, just do it, right? So it doesn't matter if it's not perfect. Perfection here is not expected. People know, I think everybody's in the same boat, that we know we're all working from home and we have pets and kids and whatnot. So no one is expecting perfection, and no one, even is expecting you to have a film crew if you're doing something from home. So even if you're just using your phone to record a message, or doing a Facebook Live or anything like that, it's fine. So don't try to be perfect. It's more important to just do. Adjusting communications as you change and your challenges or your services change as an organization, but also as your audience needs change. So, and we've seen this already, as I mentioned in the beginning. It was more about, okay, what's going on? What do we need to do? How do I manage this? And now to, okay, I need something to entertain my kids. I need something, what do I do to keep healthy? And so needs will be changing as we continue through this crisis, and depending for how long this goes on for as well. And always looking for opportunities. So opportunities not just to, and I shouldn't say just, but opportunities to fundraise or to collaborate with other organizations or other for-profit companies as well. So always trying to see what are some new programs or creative things that we can do. And you can ask your audience, if they have some ideas, or what are some things that they would like to see that may be helpful for them as where they are right now in this phase. So before we move to the examples, I'm just going to come back here in the video. I thought I would start seeing if anyone has any questions so far. So if you have questions, again, there's the Q&A that you can go in and type any questions that you may have, that you would like us, like me to answer, and I'll do my best to do that. And I'll also give you, of course, some examples as we move along. But if you have any questions, please start sharing them with me. And just so you know, I don't think I said that in the beginning, but I am recording this session. So Emily from the Calgary Foundation later on will send you an email that will have, I believe we share the slides as well, but we'll also have a list with more details of what of the content that I'm sharing with you today, as well as some very simple sort of templates that I put together to help you put together those key messages and audiences and who's responsible for what, those sorts of things. And they're very, very simple templates, because I want you to plan your communications and that way. So it's on purpose to make sure that you're not making highly complex templates or communications. So that's what we'll be sharing with you as well. So I'll resume here and I'll show you some examples. The brown bagging for kids, for instance, they have this on their website. So if you can, and I hope all of you have sites where you are able to easily change without having to hire any external resources to do that. Or if you do need to hire external resources, hopefully you have those resources to do it. But obviously, if you have the opportunity to do it yourself, then go ahead and do it yourself. So it's some simple information in terms of maybe what you're doing and connecting the dots, because again, for some organizations, the work that you're doing is very obvious for everyone, that is directly related to help with the crisis. For others, you may need to help connect those dots. So how does brown bagging for kids, how is this related, or how are they helping with the crisis? Well, it turns out that 5,000 kids rely on their lunches to have any sort of a decent, nutritious meal in the day. And now that they're off school, they're not getting that. So that's the issue, that's the problem, and that's what they're trying to address. So don't assume your audience will understand how you are being impacted or how the services that you provide would actually continue to be needed and help audiences during this time. I have a question here, but I'll come back to that question in a minute. This is another example. I love what Charity Water has done, and last week it was the Clean Water Day, I think it was called. And what they did is they weren't asking for funds. They already had received a grant. But instead of just using the grant saying thank you, even if they said thank you externally, and applying those funds to continue to do the work they do, they took that as an opportunity, and they created this sort of questionnaire that provided people with really allowed people to see the connection between having clean water and the crisis that we are facing right now. So what this does is they could have just put posts in social media saying that, there's 80% of the population that don't have access to hand washing facility or don't have, access to clean water. They could have just said that, but by turning this into a survey where people have options, it engages your audience. And when you are engaged, when you are actually doing something, so they have to read and see what the options are, and you pick one, that makes any information that is being provided, it makes it that much more impactful and that much easier to remember. You don't have to do it in a fancy way like Charity Water did. You can make it very simple. It could even be just using the polling feature in Instagram, for instance. But if you can do something like this that help people actually understand what the issue is and help them remember, the information much, much better. So I think that could be a lot of you could do this. And of course, one of the great things about what Charity Water did is that it linked back to them, to their website, and having them ask for your email. So in this time, you should always be trying to increase your email list. You want to do that because now you have a list of people who have given you permission to communicate with them in the future. And so it's a captive audience, basically, that you have captured through this email list. and you can communicate with them and keep them informed and ask later on for anything that you may need. So anything that you can connect back and ask people for the email address, try to do that. And that's what Charity Water did here. These are, and I know Wellspring is in the room, so here you go. These are some other, good examples that I have seen people do. And is even if you post things that are not related to what you normally do, just being there for people, just having supportive messages, or really trying to connect and not having people, helping people not feel isolated, anything like that will be helpful. And letting people know that if you are still providing services, obviously letting people know that. Some other great examples of what the Glambo, as I mentioned before, is doing. So they are having obviously to close, but they've started doing some they have, and they've listed here, this is on their website, but they've also posted in social media some of the schedules for things that they are doing with the Glambo online that people can participate. And of course the Philharmonic, what Calgary Philharmonic is doing, and they actually just released yesterday their new season. And it's something that they were thinking about, should we do this or not? But it is something that people are looking for things to look forward to once this is over. And I think having this new season released is giving people that, and it's something to hope for, to look forward for, so it can be helpful as well. So if you have things that you're planning for in the future, go ahead and start talking about it if you're ready to announce it. Some other examples of, in this case, the Calgary Counseling Center, again, some messages that they're putting out there in social media. And these are tips of things that people can do. They are continuing to offer counseling online and phone, but they also, through social media, they're doing Facebook Lives with different experts on areas for people to help people with their mental health. And it can be anything from exercise, nutrition, good sleep, things like that, as well as on how to manage anxiety and stress, which are obviously very high. And for those of us who may be more sensitive to that, it may be even worse. This is another example of, they're based in Kenya, and it's essentially an animal shelter or rescue center. They've always done, or they've been always really good at creating almost this little, very small video diaries of the different animals and some of the ways they play or how they eat and how they sleep and who take care of them. So anything that you can do that is about this, even if it looks very different than what it normally does, then will be very helpful. So if you are an organization that is taking care of pets, for instance, or have pets for adoption, but obviously no one is adopting them now or whatever, you can still show them. You can still create a little bit of a diary, and it's almost like a little reality show, if you will, but a positive one, that can really engage people, and it's something that they can look forward to of what is this little puppy doing or up to today. So this can also be very helpful. And just some more examples. The zoo is doing some live streaming with their security cameras that they had there, so you can go and look at those. Obviously you can go to the zoo, but this is the next best thing. Momentum is providing a lot of information, sort of breaking down a lot of the, and it's been confusing, a lot of the different help that is being provided by government and other organizations. So what they're doing is really sort of breaking it down and translating this into very concise, simple language and telling people where to go. So it's really helping a lot of people. Action Dignity is also doing that, but they are also asking, their audiences, what do you need from us? So this is a survey that they put out last week, and saying what do you need, what would you like to see, what kind of services, and then see and evaluate those and see if there's anything that they can do. And the YMCA obviously just believe it was either early this week or late last week that they had to close all of their locations. So they open now a YMCA online. It's not perfect, but it's online, and they are obviously perfecting as they go along. So these are, some examples of what some organizations are doing, and you may be able to do some of these, or maybe some of you are already, as I gave examples of some of you already doing this. So that's fantastic. But yeah, just trying to be really creative and think of ways on how you can help. So I have a question here, and it says, do you have thoughts or stats on website use? Should this be a pivotal tool to upkeep, assuming audiences are looking there? Yes, absolutely. Your website, I always say that your website is one of the most important things that you have. And everything you do, even before the crisis, should be to redirect people to your website. And why do I say that? Because you may have different social media platforms, like Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or whatever the case may be, LinkedIn or whatever. But those platforms, we don't know and what may happen to them, particularly now during this crisis. So continue to use them for sure, but always make sure that there's the information, the content, or what you share, there's something else or additional content that sits on your site. So make sure that you give people a reason to go to your website. And it could either be to find, helpful information or tips or videos, templates, photos, whatever the case may be. But drive them to your site. Don't keep that information just on those social media platforms. Communicate through social media that you have these things, but get them back to your site, drive them back to your website. So yes, I think it's really important, particularly now, to make sure that your website is up to date, that you have additional information there, that you're giving people reason to go to your site, and keep track of how you're doing in terms of the usage. You may not see, especially not in the beginning, as a higher uptake on people going to your site as they may be doing in social media. But if you have good, useful content that is stored on your site and you let people know that's there, you will start to see that. So I'll definitely recommend that. The other question is there an online forum combined of some kind of info, and what kind of creative initiatives organizations are introducing? Would be great to share instead of all of us recreating the wheel. So I'm not sure exactly what you mean. So if this is sort of a list of examples, maybe of some of which I've shared with you today. So are you asking if there's a place where you can go to see some of those examples? I don't think there is, not that I am aware of. I can certainly start one on my website, and I can have that. I have a resource page now that I've created just for this, so I can put in there some examples, certainly of what I think, what I see some organizations doing that are being really, that I think are being really helpful and maybe working well. So I can certainly do that, and I'll let you guys know. I don't have everyone's information, but look back on my website or follow me on social media, and I'll make sure I post it there once I have that list. I think it could be really useful, because especially when we try, when I'm saying be creative, think of ways that you may not have done, things that you haven't done before, or that collaborations that you haven't thought about before. So sometimes it can be difficult for, oh, I don't know what to do. You know, we don't have a lot of resources, or we can only work when we are closed, or when we open, sorry. So now that we close, what do we do? So I can certainly put some of those examples there, and have you guys take a look, and hopefully will spark some new ideas. So I don't know if anyone has any other questions. How are we doing for time? We're doing okay. If you do, please send those over. We did have a lot of questions last week in terms of, as I mentioned earlier, that I sort of included a lot of answers to those questions in the slides that I shared earlier. But there were a lot of questions in terms, should we be promoting or talking about normal things that we do, any normal programs, or I guess most of them are not normal, but any programs that you have going on, or things that are outside the crisis itself, right? And I think you should. As I mentioned, the example of the Philharmonic, I think that's a really good example. So if pulling back or really diminishing how much you can communicate or how much you are communicating, I think can be hurtful in the long term. And we've seen this in crises, different crises in the past. Obviously, this crisis is unprecedented. So we've never seen anything of this magnitude. So I can only imagine that the impact of this crisis will be even bigger than ever or any other crisis before. But pulling back, what you will do, or diminishing the frequency of your communications, can really hurt in terms of levels of awareness that your audience have about you. And again, in the past, most organizations to have done that have not been able to recover. So I think it is really important for you to continue to communicate, to be present in any way that you can, always being sensitive and helpful to your audience, always trying to be sensitive and helpful to your audience. So it will be a modified engagement, but it can have a combination, and you will have different audiences, obviously, and some of your audiences they're better suited for you to communicate in different ways. So either through email blasts or social media, or even if you have different audiences that are in the same platform. So if you have different audiences that are in a social media platform that you use, you can have different posts to cater to different audiences. And just make sure that that is clear, that for our audience that that does this, or those that are interested in this, or those who are looking for information about that, so whatever the case may be, and have posts that cater, that are relevant, and that are helpful for the different audiences that you have. So I think, but do keep that communications as fast as you can, and as much as you can to make it as a lot more frequent. So I don't know, again, if you have more questions. We're not getting a lot of questions in this session. We had lots last week. But if you have any specific challenges that you may be facing, or any specific questions in terms of your communication, or that you are thinking about or not sure if you should do, please let me know, and I'll try to help you with that while we are here. I will also let you know. So I'll share this this slide again. So you have my information here. The website which is marcastrategy.com. As I mentioned, there's a resource page there, and I'll be adding to that. And I have a podcast, for those of you who don't know. So it's called A Branded World, and that is a free resource. And there will be, there's over 75, I think, episodes there already. So just, you can go through those and see if there's anything there that may be helpful to you. but also I will be adding specific episodes about the crisis and how to best navigate, how can organizations best navigate, and best practices and examples of what people are doing. So look forward to that. And as I said, it's a free resource. And if you're not familiar, if you just, if you are already, if you listen to podcasts, A Branded World is available in any podcast tool out there. So wherever you listen to your podcast will be there. And for those of you who are not familiar, you just need to look for any podcast app, and any Android or OS has those. So it's really easy. I will be posting, I guess I could do that. I've posted that before, but I'll be posting social media as well, on how to find those, so it's clear to everyone. So again, I'm trying to provide as many resources and tools as possible. If you have specific questions, you can also email me, and I am Luiza, Luiza, at marcastrategy.com. So feel free to email me with any specific questions that you may have, any, as I said, current challenges or sort of communications dilemmas that you may be facing, and I'll try to help you as best as I can. And Emily was just saying, yes, thanks, Emily, that she'll be sending out the resources and a link to the podcast as well, which will make your life a lot easier for everybody. So I will continue to also look for additional research. So this global research findings that I shared with you were gathered from two sources, both Kantar and Global Web Index. And they are, and so are others, continuing to do more research on consumer behaviors, which are changing significantly, because, as I mentioned, depending on how long this goes for, they will continue to change. So I will continue to look for those research findings, and I will share them with you guys through my website and social media as well, because it's important for us to keep track of that. So try to, as best as you can, see how your own audiences, what are they needing, what are some of the things that you have been noticing or that they are asking for, and because that may give you also new opportunities or new ways that you can be of help for that audience. But we also want to look, and one of the areas that I'm really interested in is there are some countries who are sort of ahead of us, if you want to put it that way, slightly. So, we're countries that have been in lockdown for longer, and how are they? What have some organizations done that have been really helpful? So some best examples of that. So I'm really looking also towards those and other places in the world, what they are doing that is working, and I'll be trying to share that with you as well. If there's anything out there that is working, then by all means let us try that with our own community as well, if it is applicable. So I'll be sharing that as well. One of the things that I will say is, if anyone who knows me knows that I'm always talking about the importance of you defining and really clearly articulating your purpose as an organization. So this is not what you do, this is why you do. And with that, of course, the values that you need to have and live by, so you can make sure that you will always achieving or not trying to achieve your purpose. You're living the right values through the actions you take, through how you behave towards that purpose. And I think now is a really important time for you to show that you are living by those values. And I'll include some examples of organizations who have done that really well, and that are showing, as per our value of this and that, this is what we are doing. And so really reinforce what values you have as an organization, what you're trying to do for your staff, for those who you serve, and as best as you can, living by those values. And even if it's if things that are difficult decisions that you had to take, different actions that you have to take. So if you had to let go staff or whatnot, just being, again, very open and saying why you had to do that, and and how that you tried because of you value the service, or you value the community, or you value whatever, that you were really that this is really hurtful for you as an organization to have to do this, but here are some of the things that you are putting in place to try to alleviate that as much as possible. Or some ways that people can help, right? So this story is not over. So if there are things that you need, if there are things that your audience can help you with, just try to articulate what those are and why you need them, or how they would be helpful. And again, being as clear and as concise, and transparent as possible. And keep asking for those things if you need them, because I think it's important it will make clear for everyone the work that you do, how important it is, particularly in times like this, and make that connection with your audience stronger. So as much as you can, be of help and try to make that connection with your audience, always strengthening that connection. So I hope this was helpful. Unless there's more questions that may come through, if there are more questions, I'm happy to stay and answer those. But if not, then I hope this was helpful. As Emily said, she will send you through an email after the podcast. We'll send the recording of this is not a podcast habit, of the webinar. She will send you a recording of the webinar, as well as some of the tools that I mentioned, and the templates, and the information that is shared here, and the link to the podcast. So Emily will do that later, and follow up with me. Feel free to follow up if you have any specific question that may come up in the future. But if we don't have any more questions right now, I just thank you for being here. I hope this was helpful, and I really hope that everyone can overcome this, prevail this crisis, and I can't wait to see you in person very soon. So thank you so much, guys, and hopefully we'll see each other soon. Bye-bye.